back to a new YouTube video. If you're new here, my name's Katie, I'm a full-time artist, and I started a daily art challenge last August, and I share what I create 6 days a week over on my Instagram, and here on YouTube I do a bi-weekly roundup, just talking through the art and sharing my thoughts and process. So today I'm going to be rounding up weeks 46 and 47. It's quite a lot of sketchbook work, some experiments with zines, as well as going away on holiday, so let's jump right in. Day 270 I created this mini zine, and I did film a reel for this as well as the process, which you can find over on my Patreon. But I'm really proud of this mini zine. It actually surprisingly didn't take me a huge amount of time. It was quite easy and relaxing to do. I love painting landscapes and I really enjoyed working in this format. Usually I think of zines as portrait, and I have created one in a similar way before when I was doing one of Sarah Dyer's Patreon exercises, and that was a little portrait zine inspired by invisible cities. And for this one I cut down a piece of A3 paper and then folded it so that it was landscape, and then cut it and folded it into this zine format. So when you open it out, it does just look like this. This is how I painted it. So I did the bottom half and then turned it around and did it again. So the other side is completely blank because it folds together like this. And I'm really happy with how this turned out. I really love the colours and the looseness of it. I'm really happy with the style that I've done the front cover in. I think it's really simple but sweet. And these are all referenced and inspired by Stourhead. So some of these are referenced from photos from Google or Stourhead, but I didn't keep it super accurate. It was mostly inspired by, because certainly these photos are from my own photos in Wiltshire. So I kind of just blended things together. I didn't want it to be an accurate representation, but just having Stourhead as my starting point really helped. And then I kind of was aware of how the landscape would move along, so I made sure it all connected. And here you can see that it moves onto this. I carried on with that burgundy tree from over here. And I did make this one the front cover, so that's definite, but you can actually fold these zines in any way you'd like. I just wanted to make sure that it did follow along, and I was clear that it was basically a really long panoramic image. And I created this with gouache, some neocolours and coloured pencils. It was just a really lovely way to spend a Sunday morning. I remember really enjoying creating this one, and I'm really happy with it, and it definitely made me want to create more zines in the future. For day 271, I was in my A5 Royal Challenge sketchbook, and again I went onto Map Crunch and did some 5-minute panels. So this is one of my favourite ways to fill a spread in my sketchbook, and I'm really pleased with the result of these ones. I think they look quite good considering they were done 5 minutes each. I'm really pleased with the quality that I managed to get from those 5 minutes. I also really like how they all link together because of the blue sky and the greenery. I think it links it all together, and on Map Crunch I did filter it to be just in the UK, so it was just UK views, and Map Crunch is a random Google Maps generator. So it took me to various places around the country, and I just think it ties them all nicely, even though I wasn't using a specific limited colour palette. The larger ones are obviously a bit more unfinished than the smaller ones, but I think this one down here is my favourite one, and I really like the tiny road sign there. But overall, I think that there's enough looseness that I really enjoy, and that's obviously what I'm always trying to achieve in my work, but it's also refined enough that it doesn't feel unfinished. And this was quite a quick, simple spread, but I really enjoy, like I said, filling my sketchbook in this way and practicing with neocolours and creating at speed to try and get that looseness. I just find that the 5-minute panel thing is a really enjoyable exercise for me. It really helps me to work out what I want to show in the picture, because you don't have enough time to add in loads of details, so you have to really be specific about what you want to include in each panel. And yeah, just really pleased with the spread, and this one did really well on Twitter as well. Day 272, I was following along a Patreon drawing session with Emma Carlisle, and I filled up a spread in my A5 and my A4 Royal Challenge sketchbook. So I painted these trees in gouache, and these smaller ones are definitely my favourite. They both took 10 minutes each, and I was really happy with the shading and the colours of the trees on here. I really love the colour on the trunk on the left one and also the greens on the right. I think this is a silver birch, which is one of my favourite trees, and I just really enjoyed creating that texture on the trunk. And then I spent a bit longer on these two, which is in my A4 sketchbook, and the one on the left was 15 minutes and the one on the right was 20. And these are obviously more finished in terms of like a finished scene. I added in some background and the sky. And these were enjoyable to do, but I definitely prefer the smaller ones, even though I had more time on here. I did struggle a little bit with like making this tree look realistic. It had a really interesting light on the trunk and it was a really light barked tree. And I don't think I really captured the like fullness of the trees here, especially in this one. Whereas I feel like in this one it just worked better, I think, because they are smaller trees, and I always struggle with the trees that have the really full leaves. But I am pleased with how it looks. I think it's a really nice, full, colourful spread, but I definitely prefer these two, and I'm really proud of these. Day 273, I was back in my A5 sketchbook, and I created this spread, which was referenced from 2 photos that my brother and sister-in-law took when they visited North Wales. So I'm really proud of the colours of this one. It feels quite magical and fairy tale-like, and I think that's because of the pink that I've added in. And I really filled this spread with lots of greenery and colour. I went edge to edge, which I don't often do. Usually I keep a little border around the edge, but I'm really happy with this one. It feels like it really transports you and takes you to this place. And it is quite messy and rough. Like, I haven't finished it to a really high standard with loads of details or anything. But I really think it adds to the charm, and again, I really love the pink that I've added. I think that works really nicely. It just feels very soft, and I really enjoyed creating this one. It was one of those sort of mindful ones that you don't really think about when you're doing it. And so I was really chuffed that the result turned into this. So I have actually used the photos that my brother and sister-in-law took before, and that was to create this one. And you can see this one's a bit less like yellow-green, but you can definitely see like that's the same house, and it's still got like the pink there and still has that sort of fairy tale charm. But I'm really pleased with these, and I like being able to use like the same locations further along in the sketchbook to see how like my ideas and my process has changed. Day 274, I was in my mini 12x12 Royal Talon sketchbook and doing another day on my Swiss road trip series, which is a virtual road trip I'm doing on Google Maps. So this was day 4, and we visited Lauterbrunnen, which is a very picturesque, very stereotypical Swiss village. And this is the one where like you search Switzerland on Pinterest and you'll probably get this view. So this is Stourhead waterfall here on the left, and then on the right is further up in the Alps. And I really love this spread. I like how it looks together. Again, it's quite rough and messy. I try not to spend a huge amount of time when I'm creating these pieces, because I have to spend quite a lot of time creating the polls and waiting for the results to come in, because part of this project is to have the interactivity with my audience. So what I do is I'll plan it out on my Instagram stories, and then I'll put polls so people can help me decide which view to do. And I really enjoy working in that way, because a lot of the times the results are something that I wouldn't necessarily choose myself. And I'm really happy with this one. I'm more happy with this one on the left. Last time I remember saying when I did the previous spread that I thought I warmed up a little bit, and so the first one that I do is usually my least favourite, but that wasn't the case with this one. I definitely prefer this first one here. I really struggled on the one on the right to show that distance of having like a lighter background and really pushing those mountains into the distance. I don't think I quite captured it there, whereas I think it's more obvious on this one just because of the scale, and I do really like this house in the foreground. For a bit of colour, I added on these collage flowers down here, and I really like the pop of colour that adds, because otherwise it would be a very green spread, and although I think that is very quintessentially Swiss, I think it really helps to have those pops of colour just to draw your eye in. Day 275, I did another 5-minute panel spread, because they're always really easy for me. It's like my go-to when I'm stuck on what to draw, and like I'm spending too long trying to find the perfect reference, then I'll usually fall back on this just because I know it's a good way for me to just sit down and get the daily art done. So that's what I did here. This time for Map Crunch I took it to one location and it landed me in Bruges. And instead of then going to a new location, I just stuck with that one location and then sort of moved the Google Street View car around, and then I drew the different views that I found along those streets. And that's a really good way to make sure that it's all very cohesive, and for this one I did use a limited colour palette. So it was very heavy on the greens, the beiges and like the rusty brown, and then some blues. And I really love this colour palette. I'm really happy with this spread. Obviously you can see like there was a lot more details that I wanted to capture because it was urban views rather than the other ones which was more rural, which I find easier. So like obviously I've rushed the cars and they're not great, but they've definitely got a lot of character. And overall I really like this spread. I really love the colour palette. I think that worked really well. And it's definitely something that you should consider if you are doing the 5-minute spreads, of like having set colours first, because it really helps to limit that decision making when you are under a timer. For this one I used brush markers because they're a really quick way to get down a huge amount of colour. So you can see like the beige and the blue in the sky, those were done with brush pens. And then I also used Neocolours and coloured pencils. The colour palette does feel a little bit different for me, and it was nice to use a navy instead of like a black for the cars. Obviously a lot of these things wouldn't normally be blue, but I think it works really well of like using that for the windows and tying little elements in together. So I'm really happy with this spread, and yeah, definitely my go-to for filling my sketchbook. On to week 47 now and day 276. Because I really enjoyed creating this little zine, I decided to create another one. This time it was just a concertina zine and it looks like this. So this one took a lot longer than the other one to create. There's a lot more detail because it's less landscapes and more buildings. And this was inspired by Venice, so I looked up Venice on some free copyright image sites, and a lot of these buildings aren't exact. I just sort of used the shapes and the architecture as a starting point and then filled it in from there. And I really like the vibrancy of this one. When I was creating it, I wasn't very happy and I wasn't even sure if I was going to finish. I almost abandoned this project after like the first few hours because I wasn't sure it would come together. But when I started adding in the sky and adding in more of the details, I really grew to like it a lot more. Some of the things I love the most about this is like the pops of green behind, the stylization of the clouds at the top, and also smaller details like the washing here and some of the brick details on the buildings. So this was created with some gouache to create the colours for the buildings first. I didn't sketch for this one, I just put down like the basic shapes, and then I refined it with some brush pens, Neocolours and coloured pencils. So unlike the little landscape one, this doesn't have a set cover, so it can be like either way, but because it is a different zine, it is just a concertina, so it just folds together like this, whereas the other one folds into a proper little book. And it was fun again to work in this mini portrait format instead of the landscape one. Zines are really versatile in that way, and it was really nice to work at a smaller scale, even though this took way longer than some of my larger pieces. It was nice to finish this one considering I wasn't sure on it at first, and it does feel quite different for me because it's so stylized, but it was really fun to do and I still want to do more zines in the future. Day 277, I was painting some more trees, again with Emma Carlisle as part of her new book launch on Patreon. And I did these in about an hour whilst I was watching her book launch back, and I'm really pleased with these. I'm really happy with the lighting and the atmosphere that I created. So this one on the right is definitely my favourite. I feel like it really captures the golden hour lighting, and I'm really pleased with like the way I've done the trunk and the lighting on the trees at the top. I'm less happy with the one on the left, but again I do like the lighting, and I think adding in like that bike and that shadow of the tree really helps. But once again, I think I did struggle with like creating the fullness up here, and so that's definitely something I need to practice a bit more. Overall, I think they work really nicely together. I like these larger panels, and I like how they're clearly using the same sort of colour palette but are very different places. This one feels like a very hot country, and this one feels like the English countryside. But I love the softness of this one, and it was really nice to spend an hour just creating. I didn't add as many details as I normally do. This is mostly done with gouache. There aren't any brush markers here, just coloured pencils and a tiny bit of neocolour. So definitely less details and texture than I would normally add and a bit more gouache, but I think that it works really well. Day 278, and this was when Mitch and I went on holiday to Santorini. So I did do a couple of plein air pieces whilst I was out there, and those I'm not going to show here, they weren't part of my daily art. Those are going to be shown on Patreon. But for this spread, I did look back on my photos after our first day in Santorini and drew these whilst on the balcony of our hotel room. So although these weren't drawn plein air in terms of having the reference in front of me, it was a really lovely way to look back through my photos and draw the scenes that happened that day and still on Santorini soil. And I'm really happy with this spread. Obviously I enjoy working in panels and I really like how they came together. It was very different obviously to draw very white buildings and focus on like the light and shade, and also barely using any green. I tried to get as much green in there as I could. Obviously I usually do very green landscapes, but Santorini is obviously very blue. There's a lot of blue domes, white buildings, and then very earth brown landscapes. So I'm really happy with this spread. I really like the blue panels. I think that works really nicely. I think you can still tell that it's very Greek. I really like the little flag here, and I like how the blue is sort of echoed in a couple of these panels, so it all ties together. It definitely gives me really nice memories knowing that I do this out there, and this one did really well on Instagram. It actually, I think it's the most popular piece that I've posted, which I was surprised at because I don't think I photographed it very well. Usually I use my big camera and edit them on my computer, but when I was on holiday I obviously didn't have access to that. So I wasn't very happy with the lighting at all when I was photographing this one, and I thought that I let it down. I definitely prefer it here compared to that photo, so I was really surprised how well that did. But I really like that you could see Santorini in the background when I photographed it, and definitely lovely memories on this one. Day 279 was another piece I did in Oia in Santorini, and I was determined to try and do as much plein air painting or drawing as I could out there. And for this one we went to Oia for a day trip and we found a quiet little park and I created this one. So this one doesn't scream Santorini to me. I definitely think it could have more definition. I really was trying to get like the shade again on the buildings. Had a very white roof and like a lot of the elements were in shadow. It was a very hot day, so we were seeking some shelter in the shade, and I really loved the contrast of the white against this lovely tree here. So although it's not like the most quintessentially Santorini view, it was nice to have the chance to actually create whilst I was out there with the view in front of me. And this one didn't do very well. Some of my plein air things never do, I think because it always feels quite different to my studio work, and that's something I'm still constantly trying to balance. But I really enjoyed creating this one at the time. It was really nice to take 5 and create this whilst I was out there. I definitely stylised the tree a little bit. The branches and the leaves aren't perfect, but I think I did capture the lighting really nicely, and I do like the blue against the white here. Day 280 was our last day on the island, and I created half of this page whilst we were out there just sitting in a cafe with the beautiful view of the ocean in front of us. So this half is the one that I did whilst I was there, and again I created these two using photos, and then this one was the view directly in front of me. You can see I've added on the little colour palette there, which I really enjoy doing, and I really love the vibrancy of this one. 3 very simple drawings, and again this one did quite well on Instagram, and considering I was just doing those whilst I was sat at the restaurant having brunch, I'm really happy with them. I really like the colour palette. I think it really captures the Santorini vibe, and although they are very messy and loose, again it's nice memories that I created whilst we were there. And you'll see in my next roundup that I did come back and finish this one, which is a very special one. But that will be for week 48 in that roundup. So I did come back to that page before day 281. We got home and I created this piece which I think is my favourite artwork from all the pieces I created inspired by Santorini, and that's this full A5 spread. So I was back home with all of my paints. I didn't take any paints with me to Santorini. I just took brush pens, Neocolours and coloured pencils, and I knew that I wouldn't have had enough time to create something like this out there. So I was really happy to be able to sit down and create a view like this, which is why I sort of always pictured me creating when I thought of Santorini, was having like this very typical view of Santorini. This is in Oia, with all the white buildings, the beautiful sea, and then some of the caldera in the background. And I'm really pleased with this one. Like I said, this is the sort of thing I imagined myself painting and creating, but I definitely needed to do it at home because I needed a lot more time to create all of these details and the buildings, and I think it works really well with gouache. So I was a little bit daunted at first by all of these buildings. Obviously I do quite a lot of landscapes and maybe 1 or 2 buildings in those landscapes rather than this many, but it actually wasn't too bad. I blocked out the shapes first using like greys and beiges, and then I added on the line work on top and defined more of those houses. So it's not accurate. I didn't like spend ages trying to get all the lines right and all the buildings right, but I don't think it matters in this case. I got the 3 domes, which is correct, and that is there, and then the blue fence here, which I really like, and I like how that takes you through. And I really enjoyed adding on all the windows. I think that really brought it all together. And then creating the texture over here on the like hill that leads down, and then my signature sort of lines on top of the waves, which I really enjoyed creating again. The sky is very simple and boring. Obviously the weather was wonderful out there, very warm, but there was like no clouds in the sky, and usually I like to break up my skies with clouds. But it wouldn't have been very Santorini of me to do that, so I did just create this gradient, which is exactly how it is in the picture, and I think that works nicely. It probably works better having quite a blank sky because there is so much interest over here, but I'm really proud of this one. I think it really captures Oia, and I'm really happy with how I managed to take that view and create it in my own style in a way that really feels like the trip. So that rounds out weeks 46 and 47 of the Daily Art Challenge. Like I said, I do post these daily over on Instagram, but I do come and share and talk a little bit more about them every 2 weeks here on YouTube. At the end of these videos, I always share my favourite, and I would say this week, these couple of weeks would be a toss-up between these trees, which I'm really proud of, and then that very last one I showed you. I'm just really proud of this one, and I think I captured it really nicely. I actually also really like this one. This is probably a very top contender as well. I think it was a really nice couple of weeks for artwork. I might actually change my answer to this. Just because it really opened up my way of working in zines, and definitely something I want to create more of, so it was a good starting point. So like I said, please do let me know your favourite down below in the comments, because I always love reading them, and I really appreciate you watching and commenting on my videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next Sunday with a new video. See you later.